The flight that changed everything. Picture this. Two teenage girls, dressed impeccably in matching navy blazers, their scholarship medals tucked carefully in their carry-on bags, walking down the jet bridge of Flight 447 to New York. Maya and Milan Thompson, 16 years old, honor students, debate champions, and recipients of the prestigious Excellence in Leadership Award. They've been counting down to this moment for months, their first time flying alone, their first time in first class, a gift from their father who wanted them to travel in comfort to the most important event of their young lives. The morning had started perfectly. They'd arrived at the airport 3 hours early, checked in smoothly, grabbed matching lattes from the terminal cafe. Maya had even joked about feeling like a celebrity as they boarded early with the first-class passengers. Milan had laughed, adjusting her braids, saying they were just two kids from Atlanta heading to accept an award that would change their futures. They had no idea how prophetic those words would be. As they stepped onto the plane, the familiar smell of recycled air and cleaning products hit them. The first-class cabin gleamed with its wide leather seats and personal entertainment systems. Seats 2A and 2B, their seats, waited for them like thrones. Maya slid in by the window, Milan took the aisle. They buckled up, pulled out their phones to text their parents one last time before takeoff. That's when they noticed her. Claire Mitchell had been a flight attendant for 15 years. 5'6", blonde hair pulled back in the regulation bun, makeup applied with military precision. She stood at the galley, her eyes tracking the twins from the moment they'd entered. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers drummed against the service cart. Something about her stance, the way she held her shoulders, telegraphed disapproval. Maya noticed it first. She developed a sixth sense for these things, the subtle shift in energy when someone decided you didn't belong. She nudged Milan gently, a silent communication perfected over 16 years of being twins. Milan's eyes flicked to Claire, then back to Maya. The message received, stay alert. For 5 minutes, they tried to ignore it. Maya pulled out her acceptance letter, reading it for the 100th time. The Excellence in Leadership Award recognizes exceptional young women who demonstrate academic achievement, community service, and the potential to create meaningful change in their communities. Milan was reviewing her speech notes, the one she'd practiced 50 times in their bathroom mirror. Then came the footsteps. Claire's heels clicked against the cabin floor with deliberate precision. She stopped directly beside their row, her shadow falling across Milan's speech notes. The twins looked up simultaneously, matching smiles ready, the polite, disarming smiles their mother had taught them to deploy in moments exactly like this. Excuse me, Claire's voice cut through the cabin's gentle hum. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed in professional vocabulary. These seats are for paying passengers. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Maya's smile never wavered, though her fingers tightened imperceptibly on her phone. Yes, we have our tickets right here. But Claire wasn't looking at Maya. Her gaze remained fixed on some point above their heads, as if acknowledging them directly would somehow validate their presence. There must be some mistake. These are first-class seats. Yes, Milan responded, her voice steady as granite. She reached for her phone, pulling up their mobile boarding passes. Our father purchased these tickets. Here's the confirmation. I don't need to see that. Claire's interruption sliced through Milan's explanation. These seats cost thousands of dollars. I think you're confused about where you're supposed to be sitting. The cabin, which moments before had been filled with the quiet rustle of passengers settling in, went silent. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone suddenly becomes aware they are witnessing something significant. The businessman in 3C slowly lowered his Wall Street Journal. The elderly couple across the aisle exchanged glances. A woman in 4A quietly pulled out her phone. Maya felt the heat rising in her cheeks, but her voice remained controlled. There's no confusion. We're in seats 2A and 2B. These are our assigned seats. Claire's lips pursed into a thin line. How did you get these tickets? The question landed like a slap. The implication was clear. How could two young black girls afford first-class tickets? The twins had heard variations of this question their whole lives. How did you get into that advanced program? How did you score so high on that test? How did you earn that scholarship? Always the underlying assumption that their achievements must be explained, justified, proven. Milan straightened in her seat. Our father purchased them. We're traveling to New York for an award ceremony. Your father? Claire's tone dripped skepticism. And what does your father do that he can afford first-class tickets? Before either twin could respond, Claire had turned away, marching back toward the galley. They could hear her speaking rapidly to someone, words like situation and unauthorized and need backup filtering through the cabin's stunned silence. The man in 3C had raised his phone now, recording openly. The woman in 4A was doing the same. Within seconds, half the first-class cabin had their devices out, sensing that whatever was happening was far from over. Claire returned with reinforcements, a male flight attendant named Derek, according to his name tag. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Claire and the twins. What seems to be the problem? He asked, though his tone suggested he'd already been briefed. These two, Claire gestured at the twins without looking at them, claim they belong in first class. We don't claim anything, Maya said, her composure beginning to crack. We have tickets. We showed them at the gate. We were cleared to board. Derek shifted his weight. Could I see your boarding passes? Finally, someone willing to look at evidence. Milan held out her phone, the QR code bright on the screen. Derek scanned it with his device. The beep of confirmation was loud in the quiet cabin. Their tickets are valid, he told Claire. But Claire wasn't satisfied. Her face had turned red, her professional composure evaporating. Check again. There must be a mistake. Maybe they're stolen tickets. Maybe. Maya interrupted, and for the first time, her voice carried an edge. Are you accusing us of stealing? The cabin collectively held its breath. Claire turned to face them fully for the first time, her eyes blazing. I'm saying that two teenagers don't just end up in first class without some kind of explanation. The explanation, Milan said slowly, each word precise, is that our father bought these tickets. Just like every other passenger here had someone buy their tickets. The only difference seems to be that you're not questioning anyone else. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Someone said, she's right. Another voice added, this is ridiculous. Claire's face darkened. Don't make this about something it's not. Then what is it about? Maya asked. Please, explain to everyone watching. She gestured to the multiple phones now recording. What exactly is suspicious about two honor students traveling to receive a scholarship? Claire turned to Derek. Call the supervisor. Now. Derek hesitated. In that hesitation, you could see his internal struggle. He knew this was wrong, but Claire was senior staff. After a moment, he reached for the intercom. The twins sat in their seats, back straight, hands folded. They'd been taught this too, how to maintain dignity when it was under assault. How to be unimpeachable when someone was looking for any excuse to justify their prejudice. Maya thought about their father, who'd surprised them with these tickets just last week. He'd been so proud, showing them the confirmation email. My girls deserve to travel in style to collect their awards, he'd said. You've earned this. Milan thought about their mother, who'd helped them pick out their outfits for today. Professional but not too adult. Sophisticated but still appropriate for teenagers. Every choice calculated to navigate a world that would judge them before they spoke a single word. The supervisor arrived, a tall man with graying temples and a name tag reading Richard. He looked tired, like someone who'd dealt with too many passenger complaints and not enough coffee. Claire immediately launched into her version of events. These two girls are in first-class seats, and I have concerns about the validity of their presence here. They are being disruptive and refusing to cooperate. We haven't refused anything, Milan said calmly. We've offered to show our tickets multiple times. She won't look at them. Richard's eyebrows rose. He turned to Derek. Did you verify their tickets? Derek nodded reluctantly. They scanned as valid. Then what's the issue? Claire's mouth opened and closed. She couldn't say what she really meant, not with everyone recording. She couldn't say, they don't look like they belong here. She couldn't say, two black teenagers in first class must be a mistake. So instead, she said, I have a feeling something's not right. A feeling, Richard repeated flatly. The man in 3C spoke up. I've been watching this whole thing. These young ladies have been nothing but polite. They've shown their tickets. This is harassment, plain and simple. More voices joined in agreement. The elderly woman across the aisle added, this is shameful. These girls have done nothing wrong. Richard looked increasingly uncomfortable. He was caught between supporting his staff and acknowledging what was clearly becoming a situation that could go viral, and not in a good way for the airline. Let me make a call, he said finally. Everyone just, give me a moment. He stepped into the galley, pulling out his phone. The twins could hear him speaking in low, urgent tones. Words like situation and first class and recording drifted out. Maya reached over and squeezed Milan's hand. They'd faced situations like this before, the security guard who followed them through the expensive department store, the teacher who accused them of cheating because their essays were too sophisticated, the woman who clutched her purse when they entered the elevator. But this felt different. This was public. This was being documented. This was going to follow them beyond this moment. Richard returned, his face pale. I need to call the airline CEO's office directly. This is becoming a situation that needs executive input. Claire smirked, seemingly vindicated. Good. Maybe now we can sort this out properly. Richard dialed a number from memory. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the ring through his phone. Then, a voice on the other end, though the words were indistinct. Yes, Mr. Thompson, Richard said. We have a situation on Flight 447. 2 passengers in first class, and there's been a question about their authorization to be there. The twins froze. Did he just say Thompson? Richard continued, Yes, sir. 2 young women. Teenagers. They claim their father purchased. Yes, sir. I understand you want details. He paused, listening. They are twins, sir. African American. They say they are traveling to New York for some kind of award ceremony. The voice on the other end suddenly became loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, though the words were still unclear. Richard's face went from pale to ghostly white. Could you? Richard's voice cracked. Could you describe them again, Mr. Thompson? Maya and Milan Thompson, the voice on the phone said, now crystal clear through the speaker. 16 years old. Wearing navy blazers. Sitting in seats 2A and 2B, which I personally purchased for them last week. They're my daughters. And if someone has been harassing them, I need to know exactly what happened. Now. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire's smirk vanished. Her face went through a series of expressions, confusion, realization, fear, like watching time-lapse photography of a building being demolished. Richard's hand shook as he held the phone. Mr. Thompson, I had no idea. There's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Marcus Thompson's voice could have frozen water. Put me on speaker. Now. Richard fumbled with the phone, nearly dropping it. When he finally managed to activate the speaker, Marcus Thompson's voice filled the first-class cabin. This is Marcus Thompson, CEO of Thompson Airlines Group, the parent company that owns 40% of this airline's shares. I'm also the father of the 2 young women who are apparently being harassed on your flight. I want to know exactly what's happening, and I want to know now. Every passenger in first class was now recording. This was the kind of moment that would be played and replayed millions of times. Corporate karma captured in real time. Claire tried to speak, but only managed a strangled sound. Who's been handling this situation? Marcus asked. That would be Claire Mitchell, sir. One of our senior flight attendants. And what exactly has Ms. Mitchell been doing? Richard looked at Claire, who seemed to be trying to disappear into the cabin floor. She had concerns about your daughter's presence in first class. Based on what? Silence. I asked a question. Based on what? Claire finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. I didn't realize they were your daughters. That's not what I asked. I asked what made you suspicious of 2 young women with valid tickets sitting in their assigned seats. Would you have questioned them if they looked different? If they were 2 white teenagers, would we be having this conversation? Claire's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "I'm 5 minutes from the airport," Marcus said. "That plane doesn't move until I get there. Richard, I want Claire removed from that flight immediately. Derek, you're now in charge of first-class service. And someone please check on my daughters and make sure they're okay." The line went dead. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Derek stepped forward, his face full of apology. "Maya, Milan, I'm so sorry about this. Can I get you anything? Water? Something to eat?" Maya shook her head, her eyes bright with unshed tears, not of sadness, but of vindication. Milan squeezed her sister's hand tighter. Claire finally spoke, her voice desperate. "I didn't know. How was I supposed to know?" The man in 3C lowered his phone just long enough to say, "You weren't supposed to know. You were supposed to treat them like human beings regardless." The woman in 4A added, "You were supposed to do your job without prejudice." Richard stepped forward. "Claire, you need to gather your things. You're being removed from this flight." But I've worked here for 15 years. "And in 15 minutes, you've undone it all," Richard replied. As Claire was escorted off the plane, her heels clicking against the floor in a much different rhythm than before, the cabin erupted in a mixture of hushed conversations and typing, everyone posting, sharing, commenting on what they'd just witnessed. Before we continue, if you're finding value in this story, hit that subscribe button below. These real-world moments of justice need to be shared, and your subscription helps us bring more of these important stories to light. Marcus Thompson boarded the plane exactly 5 minutes later. He was tall, distinguished, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than Claire's monthly salary. But none of that mattered as much as the look on his face when he saw his daughters. His expression softened immediately. The CEO facade melted away, replaced by a father's concern. He walked directly to their seats, ignoring everyone else, and knelt in the aisle beside them. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Maya nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again. Milan just leaned over and hugged him. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This should have been a perfect day for you. You've worked so hard for this award, and you deserve to be celebrated, not questioned." He stood up, addressing the cabin. "My daughters are two of the most accomplished young women you'll ever meet. They are honor students. They are debate champions. They volunteer at homeless shelters every weekend. They're going to New York to receive a scholarship that only 20 students in the entire country receive. They earned their place on this plane, in these seats, in this world. The fact that anyone questioned that based on how they look is exactly why we still have so much work to do." The cabin burst into applause. Several passengers called out apologies, even though they hadn't done anything wrong. They were apologizing for the world that had created this moment, for the system that had made Claire feel comfortable in her assumptions. Marcus turned to Richard. "I want a full investigation. I want to know if this is a pattern with Ms. Mitchell. I want to review your diversity training programs. And I want a public statement from this airline about what happened here today and what's going to be done to prevent it from happening again." Richard nodded rapidly. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. Anything you need." Marcus looked at his daughters. "Do you still want to take this flight? We can arrange for private transportation if you'd prefer." The twins looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that only twins can have. Then Milan spoke for both of them. "We'll stay. We're not going to let one person's prejudice stop us from getting to our ceremony." Maya added, "Besides, we've already got the best story for our acceptance speech." The tension in the cabin finally broke with genuine laughter. Marcus smiled proudly. "That's my girls." He turned to Derek. "Make sure they have everything they need. Anything they want, it's on me." "Actually, it's on us," Richard interjected quickly. "The airline will be covering everything for your daughters today. And for their return flight. And, actually, they'll be flying free with us for the next year. It's the least we can do." Marcus nodded. "We'll discuss additional steps later. For now, I just want my daughters to get to New York safely and comfortably." He hugged each of them again, whispered something that made them both smile, and then left the plane. As he walked past the other passengers, several reached out to shake his hand or pat his shoulder. He handled it all with grace, but his focus remained on his daughters until he was out of sight. The flight to New York proceeded without further incident. Derek and the rest of the crew went above and beyond, though the twins asked for nothing special. They just wanted to be treated like any other passengers, which was all they'd wanted from the beginning. The businessman in 3C, whose name turned out to be James, leaned over during the flight. "I recorded everything," he said. "If you need it for any legal proceedings or anything, I have it all." "Thank you," Maya said. "But I think the point has been made." "You handled that with more grace than most adults would have," he said. "Your parents raised you right." "They did," Milan agreed. "They prepared us for moments like this. We just never expected it to end with our dad showing up like that." James laughed. "I don't think Claire expected it either." The woman in 4A introduced herself as Patricia, a civil rights attorney. She handed them her card. "Just in case," she said. "Though I have a feeling your father has excellent lawyers." "He does," Maya confirmed. "But thank you. It means a lot that everyone stood up for us." "We should have spoken up sooner," Patricia said. "The moment she approached you, we all knew what was happening. We should have said something immediately." The elderly couple across the aisle, the Johnsons, shared their own story of discrimination from decades past. "It's disappointing that we're still dealing with this," Mrs. Johnson said. "But seeing you two handle it with such dignity gives me hope." By the time they landed in New York, Maya and Milan had exchanged contact information with half the first-class cabin. They'd gone from being victims of discrimination to being the center of an impromptu support network. But the story didn't end there. Within hours of landing, the videos from the flight had gone viral. #Flying While Black started trending. #Ciudad Justice became a phenomenon. The clips were everywhere: Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, the evening news. Everyone had an opinion, and surprisingly, most of them were supportive of the twins. Claire Mitchell's name became synonymous with discrimination. Her photo was spread across social media with captions ranging from thoughtful discussions about implicit bias to less charitable observations about her character. The airline had to shut down their social media comments when the backlash became overwhelming. The next morning, as Maya and Milan prepared for their award ceremony, their phones wouldn't stop buzzing. Interview requests from major news outlets. Messages of support from celebrities. A tweet from a former president praising their composure. But they ignored it all. Today was about their achievement, not about what had happened on the plane. The Excellence in Leadership Award ceremony was held at the Grand Ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria. The twins arrived in a car the airline had provided, wearing the dresses they'd packed carefully in their carry-ons. They looked radiant, confident, unbowed by yesterday's events. As they walked into the ballroom, the other award recipients and their families stood and applauded. Word had spread about what had happened, and everyone wanted to show their support. The ceremony proceeded as planned, with each recipient giving a brief speech about what the award meant to them and their plans for the future. When it was Milan's turn to speak, they decided she would represent both of them. She walked to the podium with Maya by her side. Milan looked out at the audience, successful business leaders, educators, philanthropists, and began the speech she'd practiced. But then she stopped, set aside her notes, and spoke from the heart. "Yesterday, my sister and I experienced something that too many people who look like us experience every day. We were judged not by the content of our character, but by the color of our skin. We were deemed suspicious for existing in a space where someone decided we didn't belong." The room was silent, hanging on every word. But yesterday also showed us something powerful. It showed us that progress is possible. That people will stand up for what's right. That justice, though sometimes delayed, can arrive when we least expect it. Maya stepped forward to the second microphone. "We could be angry. We have every right to be. But anger without action is just noise. So instead, we're going to use this platform, this award, this moment of viral fame that we never asked for, to make real change." Milan continued, "We're announcing today that we're starting a foundation, the First Class Justice Initiative. It will provide legal support for people who face discrimination in travel and hospitality. It will push for better training programs. It will work to ensure that no one else has to prove they deserve to be where they've rightfully earned the right to be. The audience erupted in applause, giving them a standing ovation that lasted a full minute. Maya waited for the applause to die down before delivering their closing line, the one they'd come up with together on the flight. Because respect doesn't recognize color, it recognizes character. And character is what we're all judged by in the end. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Within a week, the airline had announced a complete overhaul of their diversity and inclusion training. They partnered with civil rights organizations to develop new protocols. They implemented a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, with clear consequences and reporting mechanisms. Claire Mitchell was terminated from her position, though some argued she should have been given a second chance after 15 years of service. But as Marcus Thompson said in his official statement, 15 years of service doesn't erase 15 minutes of discrimination. My daughters deserved better. All passengers deserve better. The First Class Justice Initiative raised over $1 million in its first month, with donations pouring in from people who had experienced similar discrimination and from allies who wanted to be part of the solution. James, the businessman from 3C, became one of their first major donors. Patricia, the attorney, offered her services pro bono. Major airlines began reaching out to the twins, asking them to consult on their training programs. Universities invited them to speak. They appeared on morning shows and podcasts, always poised, always focused on the message rather than the controversy. But perhaps the most powerful moment came 3 months later, when a young black mother sent them a video. She was sitting in first class with her daughter, flying to a medical appointment at a specialty hospital. The flight attendant had approached them, and the mother had tensed, ready for confrontation. But instead, the attendant had smiled warmly and said, "Welcome aboard. Can I get you anything to make your flight more comfortable?" "Because of you," the mother said in her message, "my daughter got to see that she belongs everywhere her dreams and hard work can take her. Thank you for standing tall so she can too." Maya and Milan watched the video together in their dorm room. They'd both been accepted early admission to Yale, their father's alma mater. They cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that their worst day had become a catalyst for change. The twins continued to fly regularly, for speaking engagements, for their foundation work, for regular teenage things like spring break and family vacations. They always flew first class, not because they had to prove a point, but because they'd earned it. And every time they boarded a plane, flight attendants knew exactly who they were. Not as the CEO's daughters, but as the young women who'd changed an industry with their dignity and grace. A year later, at the anniversary of the incident, the airline released a documentary about the changes they'd implemented. It featured interviews with employees who'd undergone the new training, passengers who'd witnessed discrimination and now felt empowered to speak up, and executives who admitted the company's past failures. The documentary ended with Maya and Milan, now 17, sitting in the same seats, 2A and 2B, on the same flight route to New York. But this time, they were greeted by a diverse crew who welcomed them aboard with genuine warmth. This time, there were no suspicious looks or confrontations. This time, they were just two passengers heading to their destination. As the plane took off, Milan turned to Maya and said what they'd both been thinking. "We did it." "No," Maya corrected, looking out at the clouds below. "We started it. Everyone else who stands up, speaks out, and demands better, they're the ones who'll finish it." Here's a question for you all watching. Have you ever witnessed discrimination while traveling, and did you speak up? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's create a conversation about how we can all be better allies in these moments. The ripple effects of that single flight continued for years. Other airlines implemented similar programs. The story was taught in business schools as a case study in crisis management and corporate responsibility. Civil rights organizations used it as an example of how documentation and social media could be tools for justice. Claire Mitchell eventually gave an interview, 2 years after the incident. She claimed she'd been made a scapegoat, that she wasn't racist, that she would have questioned anyone she thought looked suspicious. When pressed on what made the twins look suspicious, she couldn't answer. The interview only reinforced what everyone already knew: unconscious bias is real, and it has real consequences. But this story isn't really about Claire. It's about Maya and Milan Thompson, two teenagers who faced injustice with grace and turned their pain into purpose. It's about Marcus Thompson, a father who used his privilege and position to protect his children and create systemic change. It's about the passengers who spoke up, recorded, and refused to be silent witnesses to discrimination. It's about James, who made sure there was evidence. Patricia, who offered her legal expertise. The Johnsons, who shared their own stories and reminded everyone that this fight has been going on for generations. Derek, who eventually became a diversity trainer for the airline, using his experience from that day to help others understand how to be better allies. It's about the unnamed mother and daughter who flew first class without incident because two teenagers had paved the way. It's about every person who saw the viral video and examined their own biases. It's about every company that looked at their policies and asked, how can we do better? Most importantly, it's about the idea that respect doesn't recognize color, it recognizes character. That dignity in the face of discrimination is powerful. That one moment of standing up can create waves of change that touch lives you'll never even know about. Maya and Milan Thompson went on to graduate from Yale with degrees in law and business, respectively. They expanded the First Class Justice Initiative into a national organization with chapters on college campuses across the country. They wrote a book about their experience and donated all proceeds to their foundation. At their college graduation, Marcus Thompson gave a speech where he said, "I've built companies, created jobs, generated wealth. But my greatest achievement will always be raising daughters who turned their worst day into the world's gain." The airline industry fundamentally changed because two teenagers refused to be moved from seats they'd rightfully earned. Training programs that started because of their experience became the gold standard across the hospitality industry. The phrase "is this a Maya and Milan moment?" became shorthand in corporate training for checking one's biases before acting on assumptions. And Claire? She never worked in the airline industry again. Her name became a cautionary tale, a reminder that one moment of prejudice, one act of discrimination, one failure to see the humanity in others can define your legacy forever. But even she, in her way, served a purpose. She became the mirror that forced an industry to look at itself and ask hard questions. Her actions sparked conversations in boardrooms and break rooms, in schools and homes, about what prejudice looks like in practice and how it can be prevented. The Thompson twins never sought fame. They didn't ask to become symbols or activists or the faces of a movement. They just wanted to fly to New York, accept their awards, and celebrate their achievements. But when confronted with injustice, they responded with such grace that they transformed not just their own story, but the stories of countless others who would come after them. Sometimes change comes from grand gestures and organized movements. Sometimes it comes from legislation and corporate mandates. But sometimes, it comes from two teenagers who simply refused to give up their seats, who insisted on being seen for who they were rather than what someone assumed them to be. That flight, that confrontation, that moment of corporate karma when the CEO's voice came through the speaker, it all could have been avoided if one person had simply done their job without prejudice. If Claire had simply said, "Welcome aboard, can I get you anything?" the way she did to the white passengers in first class, none of this would have happened. But it did happen. And because Maya and Milan Thompson faced it with dignity, because Marcus Thompson had the power to demand accountability, because passengers refused to stay silent, because the internet amplified the injustice, real change occurred. Years later, when Maya became a civil rights attorney and Milan became a CEO of her own company, they would often reflect on that day. Not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Grateful that they had each other. Grateful for their father's protection. Grateful for the strangers who became allies. Grateful that their worst moment became a catalyst for progress. They kept the boarding passes from that flight, framed in their offices. Not as reminders of discrimination, but as reminders that even in the darkest moments, justice can prevail. That dignity matters. That character counts. That respect, true respect, sees beyond color to recognize the humanity in us all. Every year on the anniversary of that flight, they fly the same route. They sit in seats 2A and 2B. They order the same drinks they were too nervous to order that first time. And they smile, knowing that their journey, both literal and metaphorical, made the journey easier for others. The flight attendants always know who they are now. Not because they are warned or briefed, but because their story has become part of airline folklore. The twins who changed everything. The young women who turned discrimination into determination, prejudice into progress, a moment of shame into a movement for change. And somewhere, in first-class cabins across the world, young people of all colors settle into their seats without question, without suspicion, without having to prove they belong. They may never know the names Maya and Milan Thompson, but they benefit from their courage every single day. That's the thing about real change, it doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just the absence of a confrontation that should never have happened in the first place. Sometimes it's the smile from a flight attendant who sees a passenger, not a color. Sometimes it's the peace of knowing you can exist in any space you've earned the right to be in without having to justify your presence. The Thompson twins didn't just win a lawsuit or get someone fired. They shifted the culture. They raised the bar. They proved that when you stand firm in your truth, when you maintain your dignity, when you refuse to be diminished, you don't just win for yourself, you win for everyone who comes after you. And that's the real first-class treatment, leaving the world better than you found it, making sure the next person's journey is smoother than yours, turning your turbulence into their clear skies.